under the sea, under the sea. Darling, it's better down where it's wetter. Take it from me.
Hi there, and welcome to Baseball by Design. I am sportslogos.net minor league baseball correspondent Paul Caputo, broadcasting live, as always, from the Helmet Sunday Hall of Fame in my basement in Fort Collins, Colorado. We're going to talk this week about the Bowie Baysox in Bowie, Maryland. They are a AA affiliate of the Baltimore Orioles. It is week 5 of Curved Brim Media Month on the Baseball by Design podcast. So I'll be talking to Patrick Newt. Patrick is with baseballmapper.com, and he's one of the members of Curved Brim Media. His favorite minor league baseball team, when I asked Patrick what his favorite minor league baseball team was, he said the Bowie Baysox. But right now, I am super excited to be joined by the general manager of the Bowie Baysox, Brian Shawcross. Brian, thank you for being here.
Thanks for waking up early.
Yeah, it's earlier here for me in Colorado than it is for you in Maryland. That's for sure. I'm going to put it right out there to you. Why are the Bowie Baysox called the Baysox?
Well, it's certainly has to do with Chesapeake Bay. Chesapeake Bay is very, very important to this region, whether it's economically, whether it's the enjoyment of the bay, fishing, crabbing. And so we're located very close to the bay on the western shore of Maryland. And the bay really is very important to us, as well as it really is a source of pride for the folks around this area. And when we were founded in the early 90s, there was a big movement to, quote, save the bay. And the bay still is not to where it needs to be, but it's making progress as an organization called the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, who coined the phrase "save the bay." And really, their job is to mitigate the pollution, even sediment. So when you're building houses around here, to make sure there's no runoff into the local streams and such. So the Chesapeake Bay is very important to this area of the country, and specifically Maryland.
Does the team get involved in any way in conservation efforts? Is there any sort of relationship between the team and organizations doing that work?
Yeah, we do have partnerships with the Chesapeake Bay Trust and Chesapeake Bay Foundation. We've worked for them, with them in projects that they have, whether it's exposure from a marketing perspective. In really, it's education, especially specifically with the children in our communities, education on the health of the bay and how we can mitigate the issues that the bay faces. So it's important for us, no question.
Absolutely. The team itself goes back to 1987 when they were the Williamsport Bills, and then they were one of like 9 teams that was the Hagerstown Suns. I feel like there's been a lot of Hagerstown Suns out there, but when they became the Baysox, that logo has been pretty consistent.
So 1993 was the first year of the Baysox, and the interesting trivia here is we were the last professional baseball team to play in Memorial Stadium. So in 1993, we actually played all of our home games at Memorial Stadium when the Orioles moved to Camden Yards. And then we moved here in June of 1994.
And the branding has remained relatively unchanged during that time, yes? So
the other interesting trivia is we have the longest in minor league baseball with a singular moniker in a facility. So we've been playing here in Prince George's Stadium since 1994, and we're the longest tenured with the same moniker.
That's pretty amazing, actually. That's so since 1993, because I'm thinking back to where I was in 1993. I was watching Joe Carter beat my Phillies in the World Series, right? So that feels like
you and me both. I grew up a Phillies fan. You and me, my heart broke. I punched the wall, I believe. Yeah.
It speaks highly of your character. I was at the University of Richmond at the time. I was just down the road from where you went to school. You were a kicker for the William and Mary football team, if I read your bio correctly there.
That's correct. And I watched that Joe Carter in dorm room. Yep.
Did you? Okay. So
we didn't have TVs in dorm rooms. We had one TV that was a shared TV.
First of all, it speaks highly of your character that you're a Phillies fan. So I appreciate that about you. But the Baysox themselves, having that long enduring nickname and location is, in today's minor league baseball landscape, something of a blessing and a curse, right? Because it's such a convoluted landscape out there. Do you make an effort to market sort of outside the community, or is it focused almost exclusively inside the community?
Well, I think it's important that we encompass the entire region. So, and that's why the Baysox is important to us, because Prince George's County, it really doesn't touch the Bay. Although, again, when you talk about the Bay watershed, every tributary that runs around here eventually reaches the Bay. And so I think that that's kind of unique in that we can, it can be attractive to the region itself and the watershed of the Bay.
Yeah. So there have been sort of 3 iterations of this logo. There was one from 93 to 99 that had like a sailboat and a baseball for the O. And then there was another sort of twist on that one that was an oval that had a letter B, and then a sort of a Baysox with the curved type. That was from 2000 to 2001. And then 2002, you have the current version of the logo. So the color scheme has been the same, but the typography and imagery has changed in that time. But this logo has been unchanged for 2 decades now. Is there talk of any sort of change, or are you embracing the longevity of the brand?
Right now, we think we have a lot of equity in it.
Yeah.
And so there are some negatives of it. The negatives are the activation pieces. We can't activate like a flying squirrels could in Richmond. And so there are negatives in it. And we've tried to address that, and as you mentioned earlier, with our alternative identities. But we just believe we have equity in the Baysox, and we like the fact that people know who we are, and we haven't had to really rebrand ourselves. Not that rebranding themselves wouldn't make sense in the future. It certainly may make sense in the future. And you look at the Richmond example, because that's one of the primary examples of a successful rebrand. They really did an unbelievable job in rebranding themselves. And it's certainly a case study of how successful a rebrand can be. And the interesting part of that rebrand is the negative feedback on the Richmond Squirrels was harsh and immediate.
Yeah.
And yet it has become one of the most successful rebrands in history. And so that tells you, don't just listen to the initial knee-jerk reactions to a name. And similar in Binghamton, New York, they did a rebrand to the Rumble Ponies, and it was poorly received. But now it's in hindsight has been a successful rebrand.
Yeah, I mean that's something where you have so much equity in this brand that's been around for more than 2 decades in its current iteration, and almost 3 decades now. I guess this is your 30th season as the Baysox. That's a lot of time to have this, this aqua and orange and black, which these colors, let's talk about these colors here. The orange and black is an obvious tie to your parent club, the Orioles. And then you have that sort of aquamarine blue, which is a tie to the water feature of the Chesapeake Bay. That sort of a striking color combination that has endured for a while for this team. That feels like a very important part of the identity for this team.
Yeah, and we try to get the aqua more involved than it is. And so a lot of times when we do alternate jerseys, we focus on that aqua color as well.
Sure. All right. Well, let's talk about, you mentioned alternates. So you have some fun things that you've done over the course of the years. And I have just a couple here that I want to talk about. And if there's any others that I miss, please let me know. But I know that you've been around for all of these. The first one that I remember writing about for sportslogos.net, which was really fun, was back in 2016. The Bowie Baysox paid tribute to David Bowie. And that was when I learned that you were not pronounced the Bowie Baysox, that you're the Bowie Baysox. Part of what you were doing, of course, was playing on the fact that I'm sure many people pronounce it Bowie, and it's actually Bowie. So it was funny that you all did that.
It was so popular that we did it the following year as well. And because David Bowie was such an eccentric with his costumes, that he performed in. So we had plenty. So the one year was Major Tom, and it just was so popular that we ended up doing it several years.
Sure. Another one that you did for a couple of years after that was you paid tribute to Shark Week, which at the time of this recording, it's actually Shark Week right now, I believe. I think we're in Shark Week right now. But in 2018, for the first time, you went as the Bay Sharks, the Bowie Baysox, and you had a shark-themed identity with the same sort of colorway that you use now. But what prompted you to pay tribute to sharks on Shark Week?
Well, again, it's part of a healthy bay too. We don't want sharks necessarily, but it's part of a healthy ecosystem of the bay. And so it's not necessarily a terrible thing, especially in the lower bay, if there are sharks. But yeah, it was a way to again, get us to that bay, get us more of association to the bay.
This part of the country, I mean, I grew up in the Philadelphia area. The Chesapeake Bay is not that far from there. I went to school in Richmond. So this part of the bay and the conservation of the bay and the connection to the wildlife and the water feature and all that is really important to me too. So it's something that I really like about this brand. And so because of that, well, there are two other brands that you all have done, and we'll touch on your Copa one in particular. But before that, I want to ask, as we're speaking about wildlife and marine life and the bay, you can't have the bay without crab cakes, right? That's a Maryland thing. So you all did in 2019. You went as you embraced this sort of food frenzy in minor league baseball and adopting brands based on food items in the local area. You adopted, because it's the law, I think, in Maryland. Every team in Maryland has to, at some point in their existence, use the Maryland flag on their uniform. And you also adopted the crab cakes as a brand. So you had the Maryland flag and the crab cakes moniker. How did you come to be the crab cakes with a Maryland state flag uniform?
Yeah, that's a source of pride for this area. And again, it encompasses the entire area, not just Prince George's County. And the great thing about that is you have different recipes for crab cakes, and we played off on that a little bit as well. And then of course you have Old Bay Spices, which is a Maryland McCormick company, and so it's part of our culture.
Absolutely. Well, and coming from Philadelphia, we talk a lot about cheesesteaks or certain kinds of sandwiches, and we there's I have friends who are from Buffalo who will get into the nuances of how wings should be prepared. And so the mid-Atlantic region discussion about how to best prepare a crab cake, you could go on for hours and hours and hours about the ratio of crab to breading and the amount of Old Bay seasoning and all that sort of thing. So that is a really nuanced conversation that we don't quite have time for here, but that was a really fun alternate temporary brand that you did. One of the alternate brands that you did that is not related to the bay itself or to marine life is the Bowie Studs, which is, I understand, related to horse racing. Can you talk about that brand?
Yeah, that is one of the identities that we created that was real hyper local to the Bowie area. Bowie has a long tradition of thoroughbred racing. However, the Bowie track is long closed, but during the height of thoroughbred racing, and if you remember, thoroughbred racing was the second most popular sport for a significant portion of time next to baseball before football eclipsed us all. But so that was an ode to the history of thoroughbred racing here in Bowie specifically. And we just thought Studs was a fun thing to do. So.
For sure. Yeah. And that jersey has the sort of horse racing motif on it with the polka dots on the sleeves. And it's a fun visual brand for sure. One of the ones that I think got the most attention and has, really, I think, garnered a really positive response out there in the minor league baseball community. In general, the Copa de la Diversión program has been really popular, where minor league teams adopt Spanish language identities to reach a larger audience. And the Bowie Baysox did a brand that was the Cangrejos Fantasmas. I apologize for my Spanish pronunciation. I'm working on it. But that translates to ghost crabs. So that was super well received when that came out. And Bowie was one of the early adopters in the Copa program back in 2018. I think that was the second year and the first sort of official year. Why did the team jump on that program so early? And what is the significance of ghost crabs in particular?
The reason we jumped on it early is we were identified as a market with a Latino population, significant Latino population. So it was a no-brainer for us to adopt the program in general. And we worked hard, and you know this better than me, but we worked really, really hard on that logo and to incorporate, obviously, the cartoonish nature of a ghost with the actual name of a indigenous crab called the ghost crab. And it's so cool because these ghost crabs, if you watch them scurrying across the sand, that's why they're called ghost crabs, because you barely see them.
Yeah.
So to me, it really melded well with an athletic theme, because the Baysox doesn't really have that. And of course they are native, as I mentioned, to this area, Chesapeake Bay area. But just the idea that we could launch a logo that, and we took a lot of time to do that logo, and it really came out great. We were very well received.
Who was the designer for that brand?
It was actually minor league baseball back in, we actually had the office of minor league baseball, and we made so many edits, and I think they were ready to punch us. But once it got to the completion phase, we were thrilled.
Okay. Yeah, it's a terrific brand. And, doing this podcast has cost me a lot of money, because every time I talk about one of these brands, I want to go buy stuff. So I will absolutely be checking to see if there is a Ghost Crab's dad hat on your store here. So that'll be my first order of business after we hang up. So Brian, this has been a lot of fun. It's a really terrific brand. It's been, it's endured for such a long time, and it's a logo that I've always enjoyed, and I really enjoyed getting to learn more about it and the origins of it, and how important the Chesapeake Bay is to the entire Mid-Atlantic region. So thank you for coming on and talking about all that.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thank you.
The Baysox are easy to find on social media. Are you on social media?
Yeah, I've got Twitter at BaysoxGM.
Okay, at BaysoxGM. Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it.
All right, Paul.
All right, everyone. We are back. I am so happy to be joined right now, continuing Curved Brim Media Month. This has been so much fun, featuring my fellow content creators from Curved Brim Media. Patrick Newt of the baseballmapper.com website is, I don't want to use too strong a word here, but hero, Patrick? Hero, do you think? Is that
feels like a lot. It feels like a lot. Thanks for having me.
But you don't know how many people use this website, how many baseball road trips you have helped craft out there in the world, because people go to baseballmapper.com and they can find every baseball team that there is on your website and plot out these road trips. So we're going to talk about your website a little bit, because it's amazing. I use it every single year for at least the Baseball Palooza road trip, if not multiple others. When I put out the call to our fellow members of Curved Brim Media, and I said, okay, what teams do you want to talk about? And some of them were fairly obvious. You pulled one out of the hat that I wasn't necessarily expecting. So I'm just going to ask you, what was your connection to the Bowie Baysox that made you say that you wanted to talk about them?
Well, first of all, thanks so much for inviting me to be on this episode to talk about the Baysox. It's a big deal to me, because I consider the Bowie Baysox my introduction to minor league baseball. And it wasn't something I grew up with, because I didn't have, being in the Chicagoland area, we're spoiled for choice, not with just one major league team, but with two.
Yeah.
And, whenever school, like if I was in elementary school and I did the reading program, or, I helped out around the lunchroom to earn a ticket at the end of the year, it was to Wrigley Field. Growing up, spoiled with two major league franchises, I didn't know a whole lot about minor league baseball. And it wasn't until I went away into the military that I was stationed at Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland. I did 6 years in the Air Force, and one of the teams that's nearby, because again, in your East Coast, there's a lot of teams nearby. You find that out pretty quick.
Yeah.
But the Bowie Baysox were always great at, whether they had a relationship with the USO on base. They always had military appreciation nights. I don't think we ever spent more than $5 on a regular season ticket, just a regular ticket ever.
Yeah.
It seems so small and menial at the time, because it was just so readily available to us. Sometimes they were free, and it just was to get us there. And I had never been to a ballpark like Prince George's Stadium in Maryland. And it kind of opened my eyes to what it is to have small town baseball. And the Bowie Baysox, for the 6 years that I was stationed out there, will always have a piece of my heart as, my own home away from home team.
So is there anything are there any standout memories that you have from going to games there in your time in the military?
Well, I want you to keep in mind, Paul, I was young and, I perhaps was drinking a little bit at the time, but since you asked, no, I have got so many great memories. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to talk about the Baysox, because they kind of shaped my impression of minor league baseball. And actually, it was in 2000, like right after we were there, they were hosting the Double-A All-Star game. And there wound up being some studs who made it, who were in that game, who were there in Bowie for the day. And got to meet players and everything like that. The craziest thing was when I went to buy tickets, I'm thinking I'm going to an all-star game, was is going to cost me $100, and they were putting additional seating on the field. Like, well, would you like field seats? We're actually going to build a section by the bullpen. And I was like, oh God, how much is that? They're like, well, I think they said like $25. I was like, yes, I want those.
Awesome.
So I sat in the third, it says field seat, third base, row D, seat 8. Unfortunately, there's no price on this ticket, but I still have my all-star game ticket from 2000. The Double-A All-Star game, the Eastern League and stuff was there. So, I mean, it was just, what a great experience to be able to do something like that. I remember being able to do I didn't know theme nights, before theme nights became an alternate jersey,
right?
They would do different theme nights, but then actually they did have jerseys that we could auction on. And I had disposable money as far as I thought in the military. And so, I may have won an auction on a beach night or something and got like a Luau Baysox jersey. Yeah. I mean, just so many good memories out there. Caught my first ball, and I'll have you know, I gave it away.
Gave it to a kid. And then
no, even better, Paul.
Oh.
I was sitting next to this older woman.
Very good.
And she had to be like in her 60s.
Yeah.
Like something like she was just a little bit older, 50, maybe 50s. I'm gonna say she was 51. Hope she's doing well, staying nice and healthy.
Yeah.
And she was at the game. I turned around, caught a ball. Don't know how. I had a couple of adult pops. I don't know. That was a regular thing when I went to Bowie.
Yeah.
And I turned around and grabbed a ball on a ricochet off of the glass, the field box glass.
Yeah.
And I turned around, grabbed it. And my one friend was like heartbroken because he says I caught it right in front of his face.
Oh, no.
Barehanded, caught it. And then I turned to the woman and I was like, here you go. You can she just, she thought that was the best thing ever.
I said at the beginning of the interview, you're a hero.
So I guess you weren't wrong.
One thing I wanted to point out there, by the way, this game was 22 years ago. You still have that paper ticket, beautiful paper ticket with like embossed foil on the type there. And I mean, it's a beautiful ticket. What a lesson for baseball teams right now, the value of the paper ticket as a souvenir, as a remembrance of that team.
It's fun to look back on this and think about it, like the perfect family game, no hits, no runs, no tobacco, like the little slogans, the things they have, the all-star logo, all that stuff. It is important. And I know a lot of people, I'm in that club too, I'm sure. So yes, definitely, please teams, keep those running.
I wanted to ask you, this is a podcast about branding. It's a podcast about logos. I talked to Brian Shawcross about the Baysox brand. And one of the things that came up about this brand is that it's been pretty consistent, same color palette, same name for a couple of decades. They've, redesigned the logo itself a couple of times, but in the whole, or on the whole, it's really been pretty consistent as a brand for a long time. In minor league baseball, that's not necessarily a good thing when it comes to your marketability, when it comes to getting noticed out there. I mean, this is a constantly shifting landscape. You guys, you and Corey Neeson, your partner in crime with baseballmapper.com, you guys do a ton of travel. You go to a lot of baseball teams. You're really well versed in the trends in the marketing, everything that's going on in the world of minor league baseball. What is the advantage to a team of having a sort of classic, continuous brand as compared to all of these other teams, and you guys see so many of them, all of these other teams with these new and increasingly wacky logos and nicknames?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think what helps with them in particular, and I know exactly what you're talking about, because I was stationed there from 1999 to 2005, and they actually went through a brand refresh around that time. They changed up their logo a little bit. The logo had been just this kind of like a solid B, and there was like a sail almost a part of it.
Yeah.
But really kind of going with this water theme, which plays with the idea of the harbor and being so close to the water. In that case, there's a lot of beaches around that area too, when you're on the coastal side of Maryland. And so they changed from that and really kind of adapted the Orioles color scheme. That whole colorway kind of went with that. They have a little teal in there, what makes it a little different.
Yeah.
But when they changed and they embraced, I want to say it was like in 2002, 2003, you would know more than me. But it definitely took on more of an Orioles look. And that was important, I think, in terms of when you think about the branding, and I see it actually locally where I'm at in the Chicagoland area with the Cubs minor league affiliations. It's like there's something to be said for seeing these players wearing the minor league uniforms and then ultimately becoming Orioles one day. So wearing that Baysox logo that is very kind of, that it has a kind of a standard look. I think it's pretty. It has a pretty kind of a sweeping wave logo to it. But it definitely adapts the Orioles colors to the point where you've got like orange bill, black hat, white front with the logo, which is very much like the old school Oriole hat, which is a favorite, like probably a top 5, top 10 favorite along the league.
Right.
Very popular. And there's something to be said when in my time period, I'm going to mention a name I remember seeing from Bowie in that time and seeing him at my $5 military appreciation night was Nick Markakis.
Oh, wow.
Nick Markakis was coming up at that time. And there was a bunch of other, Melvin Mora, that young group of Orioles. They kind of were building their skills in Bowie, just a couple of levels below, working their way up. Jason Worth, all these players kind of built their way up, and there's something to be said of seeing your hometown players wearing the colors, wearing the logo that kind of fits with it. And again, like I said, you see it with like the South Bend Cubs, the Iowa Cubs. They go right down the line. And I know you're not crazy about it, neither am I, but they've tried to find a way to, even the Tennessee Smokies, right?
Sure.
They take the colorway of that logo,
right.
of that team, and they keep their players in that blue, red, and white
right.
of the Cubs. And I think that's really worked for the last couple of decades for the Bowie Baysox.
Well, and I'm a fan of that. And you saw me cringe when you mentioned the South Bend Cubs and the Iowa Cubs, because you know how I feel about teams being named for their parent clubs. But one of the advantages, I think, of the new arrangement in minor league baseball in the last couple of years since Major League Baseball took over is the longer player development contracts. And so now we have 10-year player development contracts instead of 2, 4, or 6-year player development contracts. One of the advantages to that is that these teams can invest a little bit more in brands that don't adopt the parent club's identity, but relate to their parent clubs. Now I think it's easier for teams who are not necessarily owned by their parent club to invest in a brand that actually does relate to their parent clubs in some way. And so the Tennessee Smokies, I think, are a great example of that, because they're a team who, they have a very Cubs-ish identity, but the nickname and the logo are uniquely theirs. The Iowa Cubs, I'm sort of yawning just thinking about them. I'm sorry, Iowa Cubs fans.
It needs a little work. It doesn't have the luxury, I think, of the Baysox. What's unique about the Baysox is, like I said, I think about the time you're not too far away from Ocean City in Maryland. Yeah, that's I think an hour and a half, 2 hours, if I remember correctly. I know we used to make day trips to all these places. I had friends who lived in North Beach. In Maryland. So it is very much a coastal community. Yeah. And so you adapt the colors, you adapt the namesake of that. And I remember pulling up to Prince George's Stadium, and it's like kind of nestled in the community. It was like, I almost remember, like, I think it's behind like a Home Depot. It's like a huge parking lot that's kind of set back out into the wilderness a little bit back there, and you wouldn't know it from the road, except for a couple of signs. But again, you're 25-30 minutes from Baltimore. And it's like that. If you're an Orioles fan, and if you live in Bowie, Maryland, you are. If you're an Orioles fan, you are watching that homegrown talent, just 20 minutes away, and that's pretty awesome.
Yeah. And Baltimore, I think in particular, the Orioles have always had their affiliates nearby. I think 3 of their 4 affiliates were in Maryland, and then you had the Norfolk Tides, who were not. So, but now you've got
close.
Yeah, absolutely. It's close, right? So you've got the Bowie Baysox at AA, and then you have the Delmarva Shorebirds, and they're one of the things I love about Delmarva is Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia, because they play out there on the peninsula. And then the Aberdeen Ironbirds, right? Like, so all of these teams, first of all of these teams incorporate orange in some way. And they all, except for the Norfolk Tides at AAA, are in Maryland. So Baltimore, I think, has done a really good job of sort of creating a consistent pathway while having unique nicknames on their, for their minor league teams. So that's a fun thing about them. If I were to go looking for all of the Orioles affiliates, or if I was trying to create some sort of road trip where I could see all of the Orioles affiliates in, say, a 4 or 5 day stretch, I would start with the website baseballmapper.com. This is where I start every year trying to plot out our annual Baseball Palooza road trip. And I was using that website long before you and I actually knew each other. But this thing that you guys created is such an amazing resource for baseball fans, and particularly those who like to road trip for baseball. So I'll just ask you, for the uninitiated, I can't imagine anyone who listens to this podcast doesn't know Baseball Mapper, but can you just tell me what Baseball Mapper is and how it came to be?
Baseball Mapper is a site that was built by both myself and Corey, a couple of guys who love to travel for baseball. We got our friends to kind of go along every summer on a baseball road trip. Sound familiar, right? And it turns out there's a lot of people like you and I, Paul, that love to, whether it's plan our trips around it, families reuniting in cities with ballparks, people who choose to travel to locations and include a baseball game as a part of the itinerary, as opposed to like going bowling or going to see a movie. They catch a ball game. We kind of put this thing together for people like us who like to travel around and see the country through baseball. And there's always more baseball to find. We figure that out it's almost like every week somebody is contacting us and like, hey, you're missing this, or this team moved here. There's a hometown team for everybody somewhere in the country, just about. And if you can get a ticket to go to the ballpark, we want to put it on the map. And that's something we decided to make because one day we were traveling and we were in Houston, Texas for an Astros weekend. And we're going to go see the Astros, but we're looking for something else to do besides the Space Center, which I'd recommend for anybody. Very important to do that as well. And go out drinking, which I would recommend for everybody as well. We did that as well.
Very good.
But we were looking for more baseball, and we were Googling, trying to find something. And Corey and I came across the Brazos Valley Bombers, which is a Texas Collegiate League team out in Bryan, Texas, College Station out there. And it's about an hour, 20 minutes away. But if you're a baseball tripper, that's easy. Like that sounds like a road trip. So that had us thinking, what other baseball is there that we've never heard of? Leagues we've never heard of. And where are they? And it turns out hundreds. There are hundreds of teams, and there are leagues all over the country, small, even some that are big that I didn't realize were there. And I didn't even realize, living in the Chicagoland area, where if you put an hour and a half radius around us, we've got about 15 or so baseball teams in different leagues just in the Chicagoland metro area, Chicago, Milwaukee area. And that's crazy because
Yeah.
we didn't even know they existed. And
Yeah.
it, different leagues, different levels. And it's like that for a lot of people. And so if you
Yeah.
like to travel for baseball, if you just, like I said, if you somebody has to travel a lot for work,
Mhm.
and you find yourself in a small town America, right?
Mhm.
What we've
Mhm.
been talking
Mhm.
about with Bowie.
Yeah.
You find yourself in a small town, you're going to look for what is there to do, and chances are there's baseball, man. There's baseball everywhere.
What year did you guys launch it?
So the best part is we launched it in 2020.
Okay.
Unbeknownst to us, it was February of 2020. We were putting it together, and I mean, if you remember, a month later,
Yeah.
the world shut down.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we had to kind of get creative, and we had some ideas of things we wanted to do, but we had to kind of scrap them and instead dove a lot into social media, which is awesome because that led me to people like you. And we wound up digging hard to find where in the country they were playing baseball during COVID in 2020, and we wound up making a little sub map of those teams. Some teams just have never played again. They just got together and played for that season in particular. So it was a really unique year, but it brought us kind of together in the baseball community. So in 2021, when all the training wheels came off, and there's 900 teams active on the map, that was a good option.
I remember having to plan these road trips using, minor league baseball had a website where you could look at all of the affiliated teams sort of by state, right? And so I used to have to go sort of map those out myself, and and you would check each of the sort of major independent leagues, and you could map those out. And so on baseballmapper.com you can actually just check a box and you can say, okay, I want all the independent teams, I want all the low A, high A. It's an incredibly useful resource, and I love that you guys are part of Curve Brim Media, and look forward to many more collaborations in the future, including, at the time of this recording, it is before my annual Baseball Palooza trip. But when this drops, it will be after the annual Baseball Palooza trip. And we have tentative plans as of this moment to hang out at a Fort Wayne Tin Caps game that is currently in the future, but at the time this drops will be in the past.
Yeah, I mean, me too. I'm glad to be a part of it too. I'm glad that we got to meet up in Fort Wayne and hang out at the Tin Caps game. And we both used the map to travel there. See, now I'm almost like a time traveler.
Yeah,
I'm a time traveler now, talking about future in the past.
Right.
So
right. Yeah.
It's like I'm Marty McFly or you are. I don't remember.
I feel like we should record some alternate endings here. Like, I can't believe that grease fire took out half the grandstands.
Yeah, that's awesome. And choose your own adventure. It's a choose your own adventure for the baseball travels.
Can you believe all the fans started throwing apples on the field? That was incredible.
We could actually make that happen.
We could will that into existence. Patrick, you are one of my favorite people. This has been so much fun. So glad that we've gotten to meet at a couple of baseball games, and that there are more to come, and can't wait to have you back on the podcast again.
Thanks so much for having me. Anytime I get to talk about the Bowie Baysox, bring back those memories. I always have a piece in my heart, man. Bowie, Maryland, and the 6 years I spent out east will always be a little bit of home.
Thank you so much. I appreciate everything. Look forward to more baseball games, more baseball mapping, more road trips.
Sounds good, man. Thanks for having me.
Hang on, everyone. It's time for a Marvel Comic Universe style post-credit sequence. I'm very happy to be joined right now by a new contributor to the Baseball by Design podcast, our resident wildlife specialist, Ranger Amy Burnett. Ranger Amy, how are you doing? Thank you for being here.
I'm doing terrific, Paul. Thanks for having me.
You are a naturalist, a nature interpreter, a specialist on animals. You live in Arizona now. You grew up on the East Coast. You've got a sort of wide range of expertise in animals. And so we're going to have you on a regular basis here to talk to how some of these animals serve the minor league baseball community. This episode of Baseball by Design, we're talking about the Bowie Baysox, who play on the Chesapeake Bay. They have a Coba de la Diversión brand, which translates to ghost crabs in Spanish. It's Cangrejos Fantasmas. And so we talked a little bit already with Brian Shawcross from the team about the ghost crab, but I wanted to bring you in, a wildlife expert, to talk about this species that is endemic to the Chesapeake Bay area, and to talk about like what are some of the qualities of this animal that would make it appropriate for a baseball team. So first of all, can you just give us like a quick overview of like what are some highlights of the ghost crab as an animal? What are the things that make it kind of cool and fun?
Ghost crabs are awesome because they have these adaptations for escaping from predators. They're very fast, and they can also disappear into the sand like ghosts because they can change their coloration with the sand.
Very cool. Yeah. So this logo is super cool, and you've seen the logo, and I think that the listeners of this podcast should understand that you are a big baseball fan, and so this is near and dear to your heart, not just from a wildlife perspective, but from a baseball perspective. The ghost crab itself as a mascot for a baseball team, you were just sort of describing a certain flexibility and unique skill set that it has as an animal. How do you think that applies to the ghost crab as baseball mascot?
So I think if the ghost crabs were baseball players, they would be either utility players or pitchers. And here's my reasoning. They are very fast. So the scientific name actually means fleet-footed. So they're super fast crabs, but they also have eyes that rotate 360 degrees. Right?
This is pretty sweet. That sounds really useful in a baseball situation.
I would think so. So they know what's going on around them all the time.
Yeah.
And that's why they're so hard to catch when you find them on a beach. But there's a skill. So if you ever find yourself in the Chesapeake Bay area and you're looking for ghost crabs, you're going ghost crab hunting, that is, then you might need a flashlight. And if you shine your flashlight in their eyes, then it kind of stuns them for a little bit, and you can pick them up or take pictures or do whatever.
It sounds like they might actually be really good as like a pinch runner, like in a situation where maybe
I see what you did there.
they're a pinch runner. I did. Okay. I'm going to claim credit for that joke. A pinch runner with their little claws, right? But
I pinch, Paul.
But I'm thinking of their rotating eyes, right? So if you're a base stealer, you're on second base and you're trying to steal third, and you can see behind you whether anyone's trying to sneak in behind you for a pickoff play, those rotating 360-degree eyes there might be super useful. So
yeah, and for a crab, it helps them not to be picked off by seagulls, which is why they have them. But as a baseball player, yeah, absolutely. So I think it would be very useful on a baseball team.
If they were a pinch runner, you could call them a ghost runner.
Oh, that's a stretch, Paul.
Oh, come on now. I think that was pretty good. All right. So why are they called ghost crabs though? Why that name ghost?
They're called ghost crabs because they are nocturnal, so they're out at night. They're very light and colored, so they look like a ghost. And then also they can kind of disappear, so they can change color to the color of the sand, and then they sort of put themselves underneath the sand, like just barely, and so they can hide. So they're kind of disappearing. So in a way, they're super secretive, hard to see, and you might just see them and then they're gone, and you might like it's a ghost. Another cool thing about them is they have one claw that's bigger than the other, and it actually looks like a baseball glove. So you're going to have to look at some pictures and see one claw is bigger than the other.
This is even more amazing. And you know what? That is reflected in the logo as well. That is some high quality work by the logo designers who created this. That's really good. That's really good. Sure. That's a good little detail. It really does. It looks like he's wearing a baseball glove.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
Pretty
like
cool.
One of those gigantic, like first baseman's gloves that just
kind of oversized and so good at catching. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of a cool mascot for a baseball team, really.
I think utility player is the thing, right? Like he's got the glove for catching. He's got the speed for being a pinch runner. And
they're nocturnal. When are most baseball games? At
7
night.
p.m.
So other cool things about ghost crabs is that they, when males are in breeding season, they strike a pose. They don't actually fight physically, so they would not do well in Boston. So they're probably not going to go to the Red Sox when they grow up. But they actually just strike poses, and they will lift their bodies up or lift their arms up. You can't see because it's a podcast, but I'm doing this crab motion with my arms. And
you are totally doing like a crab dance right now. Yeah, absolutely. They're
striking a pose, and they basically intimidate the other male. And then the other male will be like, oh, you're too big and badass. So then one of the males will back down, and then he gets the girl. And if one doesn't back down, then a shoving contest sometimes ensues. But usually the striking poses is all. So it's almost like a dance off, you know.
If we're being honest, that actually sounds like pretty much every fight in baseball. Ranger Amy, there are so many teams in baseball named for animals. And so we're going to have lots of occasions to break down what makes them all great logos, because they're all great logos, right? They're all just so much fun. And we love minor league baseball. So thanks for coming on, and thanks for being Baseball by Design's new wildlife consultant.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
We'll talk to you next time.